14.
Almost 14 years in July of 2023. And we've been together since we were 16. So it's been over 20 years of being together. And in this conversation, I'll start it this way, then, throw it to you and you can say what you want to say about it.
Okay.
That at 40, she's 41, I'll be 41 in a few weeks. We've been together since we were 16. And it feels like we're getting to know each other deeper than before.
Yeah.
Most recently, some things we talked about came up that we didn't know about each other. And it still amazes me, after all these years in relationship, you're still learning about somebody, still figuring out who they are. And I say all that to say that a lot of stagnation in the relationship is due to the lack of vulnerability and trust. Mm-hmm. We think we know the person, or we only want to share but so much with the individual, when there's so much unlocked in each person that can be revealed and can actually take your relationship deeper. I don't think you can have a deep, personal, intimate, loving relationship without vulnerability. And as hard as that is, you have to go through a period of exposure in order to get close to somebody. Mm-hmm. So, with that foundation in mind, trust and vulnerability, trust and exposure. We're just going to have a conversation about this. What is your views, your thoughts? I was talking to give you enough time to figure out what you want to say. What are your thoughts? What are your views on that particular topic?
Well, to piggyback off of what you're saying too, I think that one of the things you can't stop doing, even when you're married or in a long-term relationship with someone, is thinking introspectively about yourself and your own needs and expectations, and also like the hidden things that sometimes you don't realize are still there. Mm-hmm. And no matter how long you've been in a relationship with someone, sometimes there's still things, we're nuanced in who we are as human beings, and we're constantly evolving and growing. And so as you're working in your relationship, you still have to work on yourself. And sometimes we get lost in a relationship and there are things that are buried deep in, and you got to be able to grow independently as well as with your partner. I think it's just important that we're still working on our own growth, and that includes your one of the things that me and a colleague were talking about is like the biopsychosocial, social, and spiritual, right? So that we're all
just slow down and explain it.
So we're body, mind, spirit, and and emotions. So, and that's something that a lot of people can relate to. So you can't focus just on one aspect of yourself. You have to grow in all those areas. You have to take care of your body. You got to take care of your mind, your spiritual life, and your emotions. And in order to be connected and be vulnerable with someone, you have to be self-aware of all of your different needs, and they change,
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to just make sure that you're sharing with your partner, and that comes from a place of self-awareness. So
right, and I think, I don't know if you can say this, but you probably could. It's hard to be vulnerable with somebody else when you're unwilling to be vulnerable with yourself. That's basically what you're saying.
Yes.
It's hard to expose yourself to somebody else when you're hiding from yourself. And if there's one thing I've learned, if somebody's getting on your nerves, you know how to get away from them. But if there's one person you can't get away from, it's you. It's going to come up. You can bury it, try to hide it, repress it, suppress it, bury it, whatever you want to call it. You can do all that. It's going to come back up. And something we talked about in the last meeting, last link class, is relationships are built to expose. One of the primary things about a relationship is, whether you like it or not, it exposes you. It demands that you open up, or your relationship will falter and fail. And I think a lot of people with some sense want to be vulnerable and open with their spouse. Few reasons why they can't. They're either fearful within themselves of how their spouse is going to respond, or they tried to be vulnerable before and their spouse didn't do a good job at managing that vulnerability. There's guilt and shame that goes along with it. And this is where I believe building the platform of trust will automatically open the door for exposure. We want to jump the gun and go tell me everything,
Yeah.
rather than let me build a platform first where the person without request feels the comfort to be able to expose. I can hear. Okay, thank you. There are some conversations as a couple you need to have with your spouse that you're afraid to have for those reasons I just spelled out.
Yes.
And you got to figure out what those reasons are and how to slowly, if you did a bad job with managing somebody's vulnerability, you have to work on that. Or watch this. You were vulnerable and the person did a bad job, but you didn't tell them. You just shut down.
Right. That's good.
You never said anything about how, in your mind, you wanted them to manage that exposure. They did it in the best way they knew how. Maybe they just didn't know how to. You know. So let's talk about that real quick. All I'm saying is you can't have this exposure, this vulnerability, this openness, this intimacy without conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long way. Good.
No, and emotional safety has to be there, and you're right. So there has to be a level of willingness to like understand that, again, like we're nuanced, and so if I'm evolving and changing and my partner is not aware of that because there's things going on internally that I'm not sharing, I can't fault them if they inadvertently mismanage me emotionally and then I shut down, right? So I think a lot of us lose trust in our significant other, or because we change over time, we're not always mindful that while we're changing, the other person may not be aware of the different things that as we're going through life, we've started to need or started to no longer need. But it's important that we have a level of willingness to have tough conversations, and it's just required. We can't get away from it. And also there has to be a level of like understanding and forgiveness when the other person may not hear us correctly, or maybe they don't understand and they have to learn. It's a learning curve, and that never changes. I think sometimes in relationships, we have this mindset that they should just know, you know, you've been with me long enough to know, right? We say things like that, but no, like, I think that's pubescent, as Bishop calls it, and immature to think that our partner automatically will know what we haven't communicated. You know, it's a teaching. Some moments are teachable, and that we can't get away from that. And the patience and willingness you have to have with someone. We had, a conversation recently, and while I'm not always the best with vulnerability, I think I am, but when it comes to certain things, I think you realize, oh, we never had this conversation. And it's like, no, we never had this conversation. How is that possible? We've been together all these years. And that's because sometimes you concoct sometimes these messages in your mind that you are sharing some things that you're not, and you're being open and vulnerable. But we're not always. And sometimes we need to do check-ins with our partners and make sure that we're on the same page. That comes with the territory.
Yeah. And then life will sometimes bring the conversation up.
Yes.
It's not that you're hiding it all the time. It's just something will happen. And the person look at you like, where'd that come from? And then all of a sudden it comes out. But I think it starts with that, going back to that trust.
Yeah.
And that willingness to expose because we're trusting.
Yeah.
Because we build a platform of trust, a safe place. Now, women are better at it than men. I think part of that is because we're not taught how to deal with our emotions. So the minute we expose ourselves and the woman doesn't do anything right with it, we just shut it down. Because we don't know how to, we're not taught how to. Women, y'all can expose yourself. He break your heart. Let me try it one more time. And just, it's let me give him a chance. Which goes to this. I heard this quote and I can't remember who said it. Men get married hoping that their woman will never change. A woman gets married hoping that her man will. And when I read that, I was like,
wow.
If that ain't the truth, a lot of men get married hoping that she'll stay the same, look the same, be the same. That's the one I got married to. She not considering, you ain't had no kids then. You had like, life wasn't there. And then she gets married hoping that, well, I know he's not all the way there yet. But if we stay together, he'll be more. And then come to find out, she changes. He doesn't know how to respond to it. She grows and develops. And then he doesn't do much growing and developing. She's like, I thought he would do better. which goes back to, Lord have mercy. You don't get married hoping that a person doesn't grow and evolve. And you also don't get married hoping that the person will be better. If they're not showing you at least signs of being better or trying, that should be there before you get married to somebody. They may not have it all together, but at least you see them working on being better. Or, I don't know. Just go ahead, share your thoughts on that. I thought the quote was totally true to me. Just
I also want to point out that I think that sometimes we confuse women's emotional expression with vulnerability.
Right.
And there are a lot of women who are extremely expressive emotionally, but they're not being vulnerable.
Okay.
Sometimes they are overly
explain the difference.
So they're like overly expressive, right? Like they clap their hands, they're tearful, they can be very, just expressive emotionally, but that doesn't mean that they're communicating, right? So some women are very good at like giving you the waterworks and the expression, but when it comes to expressing your needs, they shut down and they're not really communicating it. So they'll talk around issues, but they're still very guarded. They'll demand or have certain expectations without sharing the why behind it or why it's important. And I think sometimes men, because they are not as emotionally expressive, that they're not being vulnerable. And sometimes they're better communicators than women. And because they might not give the same expression, we make the assumption that they're not being emotional. And I think that sometimes we have to be careful of the way that we communicate with one another and not make assumptions that because you're not crying with me, that you're not being, allowing me to be vulnerable and creating a safe place, and just because I'm tearful doesn't mean that I'm actually giving you enough information to know what my needs are.
That's true.
So we got to be super careful when we're communicating and sometimes ask the right questions. I think that's important too, is I see you're crying. Why? What are the tears about? And and sometimes we'll be like, you
push it.
You got to push it. And sometimes we'll be like, you should know what you mean. Why am I crying? I'm hurt over what?
Right.
What does this have to do with you? Why? And sometimes challenge one another too, to like, you're crying, but you're not doing anything about it. And sometimes women, especially if a man that we're in a relationship with challenges us, we'll assume that they're not hearing us or they're trying to fix it instead of just listening. No, like you need a partner that's going to challenge you. And sometimes we have to listen, be better listeners, and not assume that we're getting the right point across because we're just giving the...
It's like this is deeper than what you're crying about.
Right.
You're crying about this, but your tears are from this and something else. We need to go into that. And that I'm glad you brought it up, because a lot of women want their husbands and men to be vulnerable, but they are not. They have a limit, and I didn't know it. You said it makes so much sense now. They'll express it, but they're still closed off, and a man will feel that closed off. Like something's. But that demand of, I want you to be totally open with me while I hold back, it isn't fair. But, and men that don't know that, they'll get caught up in the tears. And oh, wow, she's really pouring out. And she's like...
guarded. Super guarded.
But I get it. For a woman's safety, safety and security is one of the biggest desires. And if I don't feel safe and secure, I won't feel... Because... at the end, we're going to get to the whole Adam and Eve shame, if I remember, the whole Adam and Eve shame thing. But for a man, I'm glad you brought that up. We will throw a line out just to see how you'll respond. And because we don't cry, because we don't show a lot of frustration, it's like, I'm tired today because so-and-so, so-and-so, and this is really bothering me. And at that moment, he was just throwing it all out on the table. It wasn't a long discussion. It was just 2 sentences, but he was being completely vulnerable. And she's like,
go take a nap.
And we just completely miss it. Just like, he's like,
oh, my heart.
But again, because it doesn't come with the same expression.
Exactly.
And that means, ladies, you got to be a man needs to be in tune when a woman's being expressive but not vulnerable. And ladies, you need to be in tune when he's being vulnerable, but it's not coming out expressive. When it comes from a lot of women, y'all talk to us like we're women.
Right.
Y'all expect us to respond like y'all, and it's not how we do it. But for us, that is our vulnerability. Just bam, without the tears, I'm throwing it out there. Protect my heart. and knowing how to respond when she's like, oh, snap.
Yeah.
That was a vulnerable statement right there.
You can't demand emotional safety when you're not able to give it. And I think, and I think women honestly have a tendency to do that more than men. Like, we'll demand you provide emotional safety, but we're the quickest to like crack the whip when we're not getting our needs met. And sometimes we can be very mean about it and shut down and blame shift and I'm feeling this way because you did this, and had you not done that, I wouldn't be feeling this way. But we're not all women, but sometimes we have to do a better job taking accountability for our own emotions and be better communicators, and also be receptive of like listening to the men in our lives when they're saying, no, I need this too. And sometimes we're like, well, you ain't say nothing, and we come across like, a little mean. And sometimes we need to, just do a better job being receptive and listening. And when the men in our life may tell us that hurt me too, and because they're not crying about it and pouring out their heart, sometimes we're a little bit nonchalant and not creating safety. And I think that's incredibly important.
You brought up something. Now, those don't know, my wife, she's a therapist. So you do a lot of marriage therapy, etc. Got a degree and all that stuff. So just, just in case, I do a lot of sessions. And one of the things I've learned about women, and this is one of help liberate y'all ladies, is this. You said something about he'll bring something up and crack the whip or whatever. Often I've learned when a man expresses himself, that woman guilt kicks in and she feels like it's an indictment against her.
Very good point.
When it's not an indictment against you, it's him just expressing how he feels.
And a need.
But a lot of people assume, well, I must not be doing enough. What are you trying to say? I'm not doing it. You're trying to say it's me. I'm messing it up. And he's like, no, you can help me with it, but it's not your responsibility. But sometimes, you can't be everybody's everything and their God and their all. And I can help you with an issue, but I'm not Jesus. I am not God. Neither do I want to be. I can't. You have to learn that it's okay. It's okay to recognize you are not the answer to every problem your spouse has. It's okay. You help as much as you can, and let's go to God. Let's go to therapy. Whatever we need. I'll support you through all this. But a lot of people feel like if there's an issue with you, it means there's something that I'm not doing. So it's my fault you feel that way. When the person's I'm just telling you how I feel. That makes it just...
Or we have unrealistic expectations of our partner, like you just said, to be like our all and all, right? So I'm having this, I need you to do this. Like, you need to do a better job with this. Help me more, do this. And some of it is valid, right? And then there are other times where it really is us. And the way that we're expressing our need to the partner is convoluted and it's unclear. So it's like it's foggy. So they are hearing one thing, but your need is very different than what you're communicating. It's what we call in therapy cognitive dissonance, right? So like you're saying one thing, but your actions and behavior are expressing something completely different. And that creates confusion in the relationship of, well, you said you wanted me to clean and I clean, but you still don't help me and support me in that way. I'm confused. I did what you told me to do.
Right.
But that's because we're expressing one thing, but our needs are vastly different. And that's unfair to our partner. We have to clarify what we need and then make sure our expectations are clear. And that comes with trust. So we've been talking about trust and vulnerability. If I have a need, I need to trust you enough to be able to truly communicate that so that you understand and you're clear. But if I'm hiding and then expressing something different than what I'm intending, it's, then we're both frustrated, because I feel like I can't win. A lot of men that I talk to in therapy too have this internal struggle with, I feel like I'm not enough. And I think that's where that comes from, a lot of it. If they're historically grow up like that and then they get into a marriage where they feel like nothing I do is making this woman happy and vice versa, when women feel that way. I think it's because we're not doing enough in our relationships to provide safety and clarity, to express our needs and desires with the other person. And they are receptive without taking it personally. You shouldn't take stuff personally in your marriage. I think if there's enough trust there, we should be able to have difficult conversations and come out of the end on the same. Something you said to me a long time ago is, we got to be on the same frequency, because sometimes we're talking, you're on AM and I'm on FM. How do we get on the same frequency? And that's really the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And emotional honesty.
Yeah.
There are some things in my life that you can help me with,
Right.
but I have to be honest, you can do this and it will help me, but it's not your responsibility to fix it.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
So you don't feel like, well, I'm not enough. Well, maybe if I was a better wife, X, Y, and Z. Well, it's like, no, this is a wound between me and God, and you can help me with it. But that's that emotional honesty. Because like, you're right. We feel one thing. Well, I want you to do this. They do that. It's not enough. Do this. What we're really saying is there's a hole inside of me
Right.
that I need filled. And I'm looking for you doing all these things to fix it, when no matter how much you do, it's not going to
Yeah.
fix it. Instead of saying, I want you to help clean up or take the trash out. While clean and take the trash out, instead of saying, I want you to be proactive and do it without me having to ask,
Yeah.
because I feel like you don't care about me if I have to ask you to do this. That's honesty,
Yeah.
rather than, I need you to help do this. They do it and you're still not happy. Be honest about how you feel. But the problem is, if you don't know it, how can you express it to the person?
Yeah.
So you say, it's not about you picking up this, or you cooking, or you doing X, Y, and Z. It's by now, I would hope at this point, you would care about me enough to do this without me having to ask.
Yeah.
I'm glad you did it, but this is the real issue. But if you don't know it, you told me it was about the dishes. You didn't tell me it was, I did the dishes. You didn't tell me it was about, you don't feel like you are respected. I hope y'all get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't feel like you honor me.
Yeah. Or care.
Or care for me, because I have to keep asking you to, whatever it is. Emotional honesty is important.
Yeah.
We're like way over time. How much time we got left? All right, so let's wrap this up, because we've been talking for a minute. So maybe we can pick this up again sometime soon. Adam and Eve in the garden, before the fall, they're naked and they're not ashamed. They fall, eat the fruit, they're naked and ashamed. Their nakedness didn't change.
Yeah.
How they saw it changed. They saw themselves, were ashamed, saw each other, were ashamed. And they sewed fig leaves, not just to hide from the other person seeing them. They put fig leaves on so they themselves won't have to see their shame. So they sewed this up to hide themselves from themselves and hide from each other. So I hide from other people because I'm always hiding from myself.
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with it. So I assume if I don't like it, guess what? You won't like it either. So what do? I spend all that time covering up, hiding it, so I don't have to deal with it, and you don't have to deal with it. But again, the problem is, fig leaves, they eventually start to erode and die, and you got to keep sewing the cover. Your defense mechanisms in relationships will keep on falling, and you got to keep building a brand new one up. Rather than building that trust and that vulnerability, we're in a relationship. And I'm not talking about physically, where you can be naked and not ashamed in front of each other, vulnerable and exposed. Before sin, vulnerability, exposure was a norm.
Yeah.
After sin, covering became the norm. That's the issue we're really getting down to. It's getting back to that place where sin causes shame and guilt. Freedom allows for vulnerability and exposure. All right, you can close it off. What do you want to say?
Just to add, I know we're wrapping up, but I agree, and I think that you're also sharing that, like, I think avoidance becomes a natural part of our nature, but it's not the way we were created to be, and we tend to turn away from our partner, and in order to fight against that, we kind of have to start to like convert our way back to them and find that safety again. But there's no way to do that without confession,
Yep.
and it's the same from a biblical point of view, right? Is the way back is confession and acknowledgement. And so when I'm vocal and open to vulnerability and we confess to one another, that creates sameness. And that's an important part in a relationship is getting back to one and joining and being unified as a team. And that's what you want.
Yeah. And next month, we'll do part 2 next month. We'll get into how to manage somebody's vulnerability.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about being open this time. Next month in December, we'll get into how to manage it. The scripture says, in the close, the Bible says, husbands, nurture your wives. The world always puts the nurturing on the women, but the scripture says that husbands should have a nurturing side also. And brothers, your non-nurturing side can push her away because you should be a fountain that she comes to and receives life. It's because a big part of our nature is our ability to nurture fellas. Got to start tapping back into that again. Alrighty. So glad y'all could join us. Join us for the Bible study tomorrow at 7.
I could say so much.
And you guys have a wonderful holiday, a good Thanksgiving. And don't forget to register for service on Sunday. And in December, we'll be back for part 2, how to manage